What's up, guys? It's Dr. Tim Jackson with another episode of the Boss Body Podcast. Last week, we had Dr. Seshan Patel on to talk about breathwork. This week, we're going to expand on the breathwork topic and we're going to incorporate cold plunging with Miss Kristin Weitzel.
While I make every effort to broadcast correct information, I'm also still learning. I will double check all my facts, but realize that healthcare is a constantly changing science and art. One doctor or healthcare provider may have a different way of doing things from another. I welcome any comments, suggestions, or correction of errors. I take no money from supplement or device companies. By listening to this podcast or reading this blog, you agree not to use this podcast or blog as medical advice or to treat any medical condition in either yourself or others, including but not limited to patients that you are treating. Consult your healthcare provider for any medical issues that you may be having. This entire disclaimer also applies to any guests or contributors to the podcast or the website. Under no circumstances shall any guests or contributors to the podcast or blog or any employees, associates, or affiliates of the Boss Body Podcast be responsible for damages arising from use of the podcast or the blog. This blog or podcast should not be used in any legal capacity whatsoever, including but not limited to establishing the standard of care in a legal sense or as a basis for expert witness testimony. No guarantee is given regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on the podcast or the blog.
Did I pronounce your last name correctly?
Yeah, you nailed it. Nailed it, Tim.
Awesome. Well, so tell us a little bit about, because I think you were in sales or in a business career first before you got into biohacking. What kind of sparked your interest in biohacking and wellness?
Yeah, I mean, it was a parallel path. I've always been, I was working in marketing in consumer packaged goods. I launched Red Bull in the United States with a team of people. And so that was, for a while, that was a claim to fame. But the interim other jobs I had around that and post Red Bull and all of that, I was always really super curious and interested in health and well-being. I think I cut my teeth a bit in like the nutrition curiosity. Grew up a dancer, really saw a lot of body dysmorphia and food issues with the women I was dancing with. As a young girl, I thought, I like food. I want to eat what I want to eat. How can I do that and also thrive and fit in my costume, I guess? And so got curious there really quickly. I was like the kid in high school that was like using a juicer. This was like before there was a juice bar in the whole States, right? No one was really doing that except maybe Jack LaLanne or something my mom watched on TV, right? And but I was like juicing things. I was going through different eating lifestyles. I read the book by the Diamonds that was about food combining, which has mostly been dispelled since then. And, lots of different experimentation, vegetarianism, dabbled to veganism, had a tough time with that. But, really just explored the reaches of food and nutrients and tried to understand what I could about those things. And that bred a really big curiosity as I dug more and more into, I don't think it was so much biology, but just nutrition and nourishing myself, what other things I could be doing to stay fit. And, certainly not until I was like 18, 19, 20 was I really starting to lean into that. But I've been in the biohacking space since Dave launched his site. I was Dave Asprey, right? It was like the Bulletproof Executive. And I've been sort of aligned with that philosophy and the weird girl in one of my corporate jobs, bringing the butter coffee in the office and everyone being like, you're going to die of a heart attack. This is crazy. I read a book by Carl Junger called Clean, and on it went. Like throughout the corporate years, I was sort of that woman who was getting made fun of in the office because most people were like, I was in New York City. It was a height of my career. It was like running 7 states or running North America for liquor brands, for all these things. And people in the office were like, 5 o'clock, let's have a cocktail. Like no one's paying for alcohol in the alcohol industry at the office, right? There's just stock there. And I was like walking out the door at 6 o'clock being like going to cardio dance or weight training or yoga certification or, all of those things. And so that everything that swirled around my corporate, let's call it income, which I was also passionate and very good at managing people and managing experiential programs. But everything that swirled around it was what can I do to shift my state? How can I adjust? What's going on with, like, is my partner aligned with me in the way that we want to eat? How can I move my body in space? How can I realign all the patterns I had so many misfired patterns in my body by the time I hit my 20s, because I had done ballet for so long. Like, I even got on the yoga mat and I was like, totally open. And the teacher came over at some point and was like, how long did you dance ballet? And I was like, how's he so smart? But like, retrospectively, you could look at my body. My entire body was like turned out like a dancer. And there's just the shape of it, right? The way your muscularity kind of comes in as a kid. So it was like cool to be, I don't think I know if I knew it at the time, but it was like cool to be the weird one, right? There was like
Right.
a level of weird there. And that led me right into biohacking. And I was around for the early days when there weren't a lot of women, Tim. It was like red light on your testicles, and Ben and Dave and people were just, injecting stuff and getting crazy in a way that felt, I think, a little risky to females. But I was like there for it. I was like, what is this? And I had a great partner at the time who's a researcher. And so that helped. I'd go off to work and he'd be like researching things all day or during his work day. And then I'd come home to dinner and he'd give me like the Cliff Notes summary of, hey, so I just read this whole thing about the paleoprimal movement and here's the synopsis. And then we'd try stuff. And that, I think, breeds back to something you already know, which is like, we need to do this with like friends and colleagues and in community. We can do it better because we can sort of digest things and test things and, win together or fail together or have different results and be like, oh, wow, we're really individual. And yeah, how lucky that we get to do all that.
That's awesome. And at what point did you start incorporating the cold plunging?
So it's so funny. I was on a podcast 2 months ago, maybe, where this was not intentional, but at 11 years, I was really sitting with like, when was the first time I noticed like the power of cold? Because people have asked me that a lot, right? And I typically have always said, I did from that year, from those early years of like 20 and on, I was in New York City, or eventually I was in LA, and I was like I was going to the Korean spas and the Russian and Turkish house community in New York City. And so exploring that and being curious about it and being like, this is kind of cool. It's like sauna culture, but cold pools, but I didn't have any protocols that I knew, but I was doing that all along. And then I like really sat with like, when was the first time I noticed the power of cold? And I have this memory that's very distinct and I knew it, but I just never connected the two. That I was like, when I was 11, I went to this little girl friend of mine birthday party in school. Her name was Rebecca Basio. Isn't it funny how we know everyone's last name from high school?
Yeah.
We just call them in their full name, or from elementary school.
Right.
And I was like complaining. She was a birthday girl and we were having fun and what we were doing. But at some point I was just chatting with her one-on-one. And I was like, I don't like getting up for school. Like, I love school and it's so interesting. And like, I actually liked school, but I didn't like getting up early. Like, I was like, my dad was a night owl. I saw that as like, oh, that's a genetic thing I probably have. Like, I'm going to be like dad. And I was complaining to her and she's like, you know what I've been doing? I've been like getting up in the morning, like early when my mom gets up, and I go into my bathroom and I like splash, I turn only cold water on and I like splash my face repeatedly with cold water. And I was like, huh, like that's weird. And also, okay. She's like, but it's like intense. It wakes me up and it's weird in the beginning, but then I feel like refreshed and ready to go. Like, it's just a total change into me, like getting dressed and going off to school. And I was like, okay. And didn't think a lot of it, but just like went home and was like, okay, well, Rebecca did it. She said it works. And I hate getting up in the morning. So I started doing it. And I did it for the better part of that year, unbeknownst to me, what it was doing to my system, right? Mammalian dive reflex and all the things that I might know now. And I just remember being in like the double sink bathroom, was like blue porcelain, like very, very like, 70s, 80s vibes, and splashing cold water on my face and being like, oh, I can't believe this works. This works. And I was all in. And it's just, fantastic for me to be like, damn, that's like the real part of the origin story, when there was like a first noticeable shift. And who knew? And all those years ago, I never knew. But then when I got to LA about 7 years ago, I started being like, oh, something's here. And I started following like what Gabby and Gabby Reece and Laird were doing, big wave surfer and pro volleyball. queen that she is. And I was like, what is this thing? This like ice bath sauna, if you know Laird Hamilton, he's like, I mean this in the best way possible. He's like an adventurous 14-year-old boy, like still, like he's just like, woo, let's go. And
Yeah.
I think you have to be, right? You have to be a little crazy and a little on the fringe to be able to like ride the waves that he did in his life and hold breath underwater with like big rocks and all the things. And I really, really wanted to go to this weekend that they were doing, and it was costly. And I was like chatting with I had a guy, a Rolfer. For any people out there who don't know what Rolfer or structural integration is or Heller work, it's like changed my structural life. But I was chatting with him and he's like, they're doing an event. You could figure it out, just figure it out. Right. And so I went, I brought on a new client and I actually could go to this weekend at Laird and Gabby's house. And that was the thing. That was when it really clicked. They have an XPT training program. It's around breath. It's around cold. It's a little bit around sauna or contrast and sport. And a lot of underwater, especially at that time. It's changed a bit now because of regulation and because people get real nervous and cancel culture and all that. But in the early days, I went there and we were doing like underwater weight training. And so you're doing it and they're like, I want to say to anyone who's listening, don't do this alone. Don't do it at home. Don't bring weights in the pool. It's not a smart idea unless you're under supervision of people who really are experts. And the entire time we were doing it, they had a master diver underwater because it's like 30, 40 pound weights, here and there. Some of it was shallow water, which was cool. And I'm like sort of certified to be able to lead some shallow water weight training, but the underwater stuff is gnarly. And most of the people that are there were like pro style athletes or ex-pro athletes. And then there's like little old me, like, okay, I'm athletic, but I don't have a great grasp of water, or like holding my breath underwater is something that I lose my panic sets in a bit more, right? As with many of us it would, but surfers don't have that as much, right? Divers don't have that. And so it was really wild to go underwater and do all of that and have myself feel safe. And there were times that I was like, I'm so glad this is a pool, because I like would come up on the side and I'd be like, have some tears. Gabby was like, what's going on here? She's very practical. Just like more air, less effort. Just let your body do the work. And I was like, oh.
And what kind of weights did you have? Was it like the dumbbells filled with water or?
No, like metal, legit, like concrete bottom pool. So, this is the other thing about bringing weights in the pool. You could damage your pool. So,
Yeah.
but it was like standard metal weights, dumbbells. And really some of the most amazing challenge and lessons that I learned about navigating breath control in water like that. And again, like with a master diver there, feeling like, okay, there's people watching above the pool, there's 4 coaches on, and there's a guy under the water. So I can try things here that I might not ever try again, even. And we also did some ocean stuff and things like that. But through Gabby and through Laird, I met Patrick McEwen, and just he's a little bit introverted and so wonderful. He was there that whole weekend. And I was like, oh my God, Patrick, I literally brought questions on day 2 for him about breath work, and asked him 100 questions about sports performance and breath during his lunch hour, poor guy. And then, and the other thing was cold. Like I was the weakest link for sure. I mean, just to speak plainly with love to myself, when we were in weights in the pool, I was the weakest one there. And that's fine. Like I'm still learning, right? Still growing. And so I decided that when we did the portion that was going to be ice plunging, that not only was I going to go in the cold, which I was familiar with a bit from all these spas and things like that, where I was doing like 30 to 60 seconds and being like, woo, I was like, oh, okay, I understand the benefits of cold. I've broken it down a bit more now in my life and in this weekend. And I'm going to get in the cold, and there's, it's 90% men there. And I'm like, I'm going to get in the cold, and all these big beefcake strong guys who just crushed me in the pool, competitively, I'm going to get in and be like a Zen master. I'm going to head dunk on the way in. I decided intentionally, like at lunch, I'm going first. I'm going to head dunk on the way in and the way out. And I'm doing a full 3 minutes, which was the max they were allowing that day. And I didn't even have to say anything after lunch. I just walked over to the tub when we all gathered in these little groups. And Mark, the coach there, was like, okay, I guess Kristin's going first, because I'm sure my energy was like right, there with solid intention. And I did just that. And it's one of the most valuable lessons I learned, not just about the cold, but about life. And you see this in weight training too. It's the approach. I set myself up with visualization and the knowing, the deep knowing that I was going to be able to go in there, do the thing. And I also, for me, I was like, my nervous system had been so heightened in the pool. I was like, how can I stay so down regulated that I'm actually okay? And not having a gas reflex, not having any of that, just centering myself and calmly breathing. And I knew enough about breath to kind of have that grok that. And then I knew, I'm also a little competitive. Okay, Tim. So like I'm sitting in the tub and I came up, and when I did this thing, my body did this physiological thing. I call it the turnover. Some people call it the bliss point, but it's like when the mammalian dive reflex and your heart rate slows and your nervous system is like recognizing that you're doing this, and you're breathing nasally, long exhales, and you settle in. There's this like collide of your mindset and your physiology. And I call that moment, which can be anywhere from 30 seconds to 90 seconds, depending on the person. But I call that moment the turnover. And if you look at thousands and thousands of bodies, you can sort of see it happening. And it may be a small window of several seconds, but it's there. And so when I had the turnover, I like had a moment where I saw all of these big, strong men around the edge of the tub. And they were like, and I could see that their mindset was like, oh my goodness, this girl who wasn't so strong in the pool is bringing it, right? She's like bringing it right now. And I have to get in this cold water and be as good as that, because if she's the weakest link, then I have to. So there was a moment of clarity, and there was a moment of capacity. I was like, oh my God, I have so much more capacity. And I recognize that in that ice tub moment. So kind of a long story, but really what I took from that into the rest of my career, doing what I'm doing with biohacking, but now really having niched down quite a bit into breath and cold is what I'm known for, is especially being a female in the space, is that piece. It's the approach and how you set yourself up. It's understanding how to shift your nervous system tone. And then it's just, holy shit, my capacity for greatness is way more than I'm giving myself credit for. And it's not about learning, although that can be a thing, that you have capacity, and gaining education and experience, because that will help. But I think where we sell ourselves short is our capacity when we were born into this world is amazing. And we're doing a lot of negative talk and a lot of, there's a lot of self-worth, unworthiness vibes going on with people, and looking in the mirror and having imposter syndrome. And we really, over time, we unwind the beauty that we are. And so it's like, this is about a rediscovering. That to me is what cold is really about.
And how long ago was it that you did the training with Laird and Gabby?
It's coming up on 7 years.
Okay. And so then when you came home from that immersion experience, so to speak, did you purchase a cold plunge tub right away, or?
After I had the cold plunge experience, I chased Mark and Gabby and Laird and around and said, ain't no way I'm not coaching this. I know you have, because that was an experiential weekend, right? It was much more of like a luxury item, if you will. They were also doing a coaching training at a limited, like sort of a limited number of coach trainings for coaching XPT and getting certified. And I was like, hey, when's the next training? And they're like, we only have one that's local, even remotely local and close to now. It's next weekend. So think about it. It's like Sunday and it's like next Friday. And I'm like, okay. And they're like, it's sold out. And I was like, you can't fit me in? Like, there's no way. They're like, no, it's sold out. It's full. And I was like, well, what's the deal with it? They're like, you have to do 18 hours of homework. I was like, okay, I'll do it. I don't care. Like, get me in the training. And I kind of like sweetly, with so much love, was so full and so intent on doing these that I just talked them into letting me in. I was like, come on, come on, come on, come on. And then they finally told me, it might've been Saturday, end of day. And then Sunday they were like, okay, we made a spot for you, but you have to get all your work done. And it was a lot of work to prep for, but I was so ready for it. And I just knew in my bones that it was something I needed to do. And from there, and you don't know me that well, but I always show up with 100 questions, much to my medical practitioners and courses I take, much to their dismay sometimes. But I just showed up with 100 questions and was like all in on that training, and then just continue to build from there. The question about the ice bath is, as soon as I came home, I invested in a trough for my roof in LA. I bought a meat freezer 6 months later and like sealed it and used that. I kind of alternated between like using it for plunging and using it to hold ice. Had ice deliveries come to my house. There was like a lot of 99-cent store runs and then 3 flights up and down of, workout of the day, carrying ice for clients. I already had a client base, so I just started incorporating it with them. And very shortly after, probably 2 or 3 weeks after I got certified, I did a 30-day challenge. 6 years ago, a 30-day challenge of cold. Let me be clear. Everyone thought I was nuts. And no one was like, yeah, I'm going to follow you on Instagram. This is awesome. People were like, okay, weird girl, which is so different now, right? Which is so different. And I ended up doing like 34 days. I always shot in the trough. I always like shared content. Every day I shared content. And I did like keto eating and pricked my finger and got in the tub and checked some hormones and, did a workout. It was like almost maladaptive training, but I wanted to push my edges. And the ice bath was the thing that got the most eyeballs. And people started joining, coming over and being like, can I do it with you? And then on day 28, someone's like, I can't make it until Thursday. Can you just do one more day? And so I did like 34 days straight. And
Wow.
yeah, I was like, that was it. I was hooked and I was in, and I was like stoked about it. I was also, there are days that you're just like, it's rainy, it's shitty, I don't want to get in. And those are the days when you make your mark on yourself.
Right. And so when you moved to LA, you started health coaching clients in person. And then once you did the cold training with Laird and Gabby, you started incorporating that with those clients.
Yeah. Another person I met at the Laird and Gabby training weekend was Dan Garner. And I just like,
Wow.
I can't, oh, see, him. See, like, I can't, he's getting more and more popularized in like, in let's say pop culture of nutrition and health and well-being, but he's always been a badass. He's always been an epic leader for me and mentor. And he works with Andy Galpin, and everyone knows Andy from Huberman's podcast and all the things, but I cannot recommend Dan enough. He's like young. He's just really, he's been a pinnacle figure in my life in so many ways. And he's the one who gave me like nutrition insights. And he was the one who said to me when I was doing keto, which I just want to say, sidebar for women, I don't recommend long-term daily ice baths for women. And I don't recommend long-term keto for females. I did these in cycles, but also I was really into keto and trying to utilize that to bolster my athleticism. And when I went to go work with Dan, I basically said, I'll take your course, I'll buy your course, but I'm not going to buy it unless you do a crossover mentorship with me aligned with that course. And I want you to treat me like an athlete, not like a woman who's not a professional athlete. I want to know what it feels like. And he was beautifully hard on me, and I learned a lot from him. So that was
he looks super young.
He's in his 30s. It doesn't matter. He's he just dedicated so much of his life. He had such a challenging job landscape when he was younger, like very blue collar, and he just leaned in, and he has the capacity, ability, and finesse to be able to like dive into research and apply. And he was all about labs. And he said to me the one thing, like, I'll do all the things you want, Kristin, because you can tell I'm a person who asks for what they want. I'll do all the things you want, Kristin, but I'm not going to coach you or let you do this program or do one-on-one with you if you think you're going to eat keto. You're not eating keto. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to give you liquid carbohydrates and put you on a training plan. And I was like, to a biohacker, to a paleo person, I was like, liquid carbohydrates that I have to drink twice before my workouts. Like, it sounds ridiculous to say the person you really want to work with, is that a holdback? But I had to take a minute and swallow hard and say, even though this guy's slightly younger than me, he's so applied in his science, his understanding, his research, and he gets damn good results for everyone. And he mostly works with professional athletes. Like you see him in the UFC and the boxing set. But
I know Sugar Sean O'Malley came out and said that he changed his life. I mean, the guy, when I said he was young, I wasn't saying like he doesn't know what he's talking about. I mean, he seems super smart from what I've seen.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess his anti-aging program is working. But I saw him on Dave Tate, powerlifter from Westside Barbell, on his podcast. And I think Joe Rogan mentioned him, and a few other people. But it's kind of like
really
you said.
Good to hear when you see like good things and notoriety coming to people who've been. It's like this is a very prime story, right? It's not overnight success. He's been working and refining, and he's the first one to talk to me about like female hormone cycling and what happens. And I was like pissed. I was excited and I was like enthusiastic and impassioned, but I was pissed. I remember calling the guy who's my ex now and being so excited about this one module and talking with Dan about the women's hormone cycle. And I remember being so angry that no medical professional had talked to me. And in health class, we hadn't learned about it in the way, to the depth that Dan had talked about it. And yeah, I don't want it to be an advertisement for Dan Garner, but he's incredible. And he's definitely someone that I look to for clarity and also practicality. Like, he cuts through the marketing bullshit and the influencer Instagram bullshit. And he really is just like, yeah, his work speaks for itself. It's awesome. And
Yeah,
that's, again, like, get a mentor. Anyone who's listening, if there's an area you want to grow your expertise, get a mentor. This is why I coach. This is why I launch in a month, a mentorship for people in breath and cold, for breath and cold mastery. It's like, if you're coaching things, beautiful. You want to layer these practices in. I don't know, Tim, if you see this a lot, but people in general, no judgments. The hardest thing about health optimization is like understanding the ruthless consistency that you need every day, and also figuring out your bio-individual self. Like, what do my labs say? And how am I different than Tony? And what works for Dave Asprey is not going to work for me. And what works for my friend Bunny doesn't work for me. And knowing that to your toes, and having someone advocate for you to get you there, right? To get you the practical experience as like quickest point from A to B, which, by the way, is never going to be 5 minutes or like a 30-second Instagram reel or any of that other stuff. And so, yeah, there's like really big stuff in the mix. And I think breath and cold, specifically cold, but breath and cold together, when you put them together, there are no two modalities that I've used and I've used a lot, and I've had a lot of fails in the biohacking world as a female. There are no two modalities that I've used that create such effective, efficient transformation. And it's the gateway. People understand their capacity, and all of a sudden they're like, oh, maybe I can adhere to that nutrition plan. Wait a second. Maybe I should put down the pint of Ben and Jerry's. No judgments. I love Ben and Jerry's. Like, maybe I should lift heavy weights, even though I'm a little intimidated to show up into the gym, or get some kettlebells in my house, or do that lab work that I'm nervous about because I might have Lyme or mold toxicity. It gives them authority. It gives them their own authority to be like, okay, I have permission. And that's to me why it's so important.
Yeah, and let's talk. So I had Tom Seeger from the Morosco Forge on the show. He was the first person I had on the show talking about cold immersion. But talk to us about some of the physiological changes that happen immediately when you go into the cold, and then say 10 minutes after.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest reason people always talk about what the benefits of cold are, like it's there's a big thing that's like, it's for fat loss. It's like, well, depends. Are you consistent? Are you ruthlessly consistent doing it several times a week? Are you doing it over the course of, a longer period of time? Are you doing a good nourishing nutrition program around it? Doesn't mean you can't have a treat. Just, are you eating well around it? And yes, there's a big caloric burn that comes with going in the cold, and then your body shivering to rewarm itself. So you're going to burn calories. You're actually going to boost. Mike T. Nelson has a great piece in his course on how you can boost your metabolism over 300% for 36 hours. This is the other thing people, I hate to say, get wrong, but they're like, it boosts your metabolism. It's like, well, not forever, but for 36 hours, you're going to be able to burn more calories, and you're going to probably feel hungrier. So be wary. And over time, I have seen people recomposition their body. It does not mean if you get in the ice tub that you're making muscle. It just means that you might burn calories. And if you're smartly eating alongside that, you'll burn more fat off the body. When women hear that, I barely have to get the sentence out of my mouth, and they're like, women who are like, I'm never going in the ice bath, are like, I'm all in. So there is a component of recomposition that can happen. There's definitely the long-term effects of bringing down inflammation. Again, one ice bath, nominal, not going to be a huge change, right? The biggest benefits I see from ice are shifting your mental state. So people who are dealing with emotionality that is interfering with their day, and people who are feeling low or depressed, people who are feeling like they can't do something they really want to do, and a little bit of imposter syndrome. The cold, because it affects your neurochemistry and has you boost norepinephrine and adrenaline and all these things, right? Norepinephrine, epinephrine, adrenaline, noradrenaline. And oxytocin, when you're doing it with other people, and really gives you this hit of bliss chemicals, your body begins to shift in 30 seconds in the water and continues to shift until you get out. And as you get out, and even after you get out, right, there's this cascade that continues to happen. It's why the positive neurochemicals in your body, when you get out, quite often, like I would put Hollywood producers managing $1 million movie budgets in the cold, and they'd come over and I'd be a little nervous because they're very stoic, and they'd come in the cold and they'd do their ice plunge and they'd get out and they'd be singing like Lion King, like show tunes, like childhood songs on my roof in LA, like, ah! And these are people that that was in some ways, some of my favorite moments, because it's like, you get to see someone in their like 11-year-old self, their 12-year-old, their little kidness and playful. And it's so beautiful. So that's a big one. And then the second big one is, I think I like to sunset plunge because I always get more deep sleep post cold. Now that doesn't mean 5 minutes before I go to bed, but a routine I will have is like plunging around sunset, which is great. You get the low level light, you plunge in the cold, you get sparky and hungry. I cook a nice big meal for 20 minutes, half an hour. Then I eat because I'm starving and it feels satiating. And then another hour or two go by and I go to bed, unwind for the evening, do all the red light stuff.
And it doesn't keep you up in terms of raising norepinephrine?
No, not at all. Not at all, because it's like there's a rise in that, and then there's like a deterioration of it that's just, it actually sets me up. You have a parasympathetic rebound when you get out.
Right.
Basically, what's happening in your body is it's like, holy shit, we just survived. Kristin did this crazy thing. Or it thinks that you were in an emergency situation. And so you get a parasympathetic rebound, and that is that plus eating is like your parasympathetic rebound sets you up for digestion, success, and all the way into sleep. It's epic. Not that you can't plunge other times of the day. That's what I prefer. I really like it. And I see benefits for sleep.
And what are your thoughts? So Tom Seeger gave the case study of himself and a few other people who purchased the Morosco, that instead of exercising and then getting in the cold plunge, he would get in the cold plunge and then exercise, and his testosterone increased significantly more by cold plunging and then working out. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have lots of thoughts on that. I've been talking about it for a number of years, but then Joe Rogan says it and everybody listens, which is great. Look, I just wanted to get out there. I don't care if it comes from me or someone else. So I'm really big on two things with Sherpa Breath and Cold, which is the name of the program that I run, and the instructor training program of level 1, level 2 instructors, and this Breath and Cold Mastery that's coming out in a month. So Sherpa Breath and Cold, the philosophy that we have across myself and all the master trainers, are the two most important things are safety and context. And so talking about context in this regard is like, the answer to your question is it depends. And again, Mike T. Nelson's done some stuff around like, if you're like, everyone says mTOR is stunted, and if you're doing a big strength training workout, like don't get in the cold. Like I agree with most of that. I think also just in speaking with Mike about cold and what he's seen and putting people in and kind of testing it, you could, if you just felt hot and sweaty and you just grunted out a big workout and you wanted to like dip yourself in for under 30 seconds, like an in and out, it's just a nice refreshing thing. It's not really going to stunt so much of that. And when I train, I prefer, and I've had the luxury of being around things like the ARX machine, which is a data-driven machine. You actually real-time data that you can see what's happening every single time you're pressing weight, resistance trainer. I, for the last couple of years, and like, even as because I'm just back in Austin, I'm like getting myself set up on it for this, but I will go into the ice plunge and then I will train after. The money spot is, and I don't know if Tom talked about this, what we see, we just meaning like the people who are doing this over time and applying it to our clients, what we see is most beneficial and safe for context is if you are strength training to get gains, if you are wanting to micro tear the muscle to get stronger, and it is a build phase, then you're best off training in the cold before. Doing maybe 3 to 5 minutes in the cold. Sometimes I do a little more, but I'm more adapted. And then taking a 5 to 10 minute period of time that is a rewarming period. Now you want to go through the shiver response before you get on any heavy weights. You want to make sure the belly of the muscle is warm enough to be able to go do the action you're going to do. Because if you're going to go try to crush some deadlifts or something, you just don't want to get hurt, right? Or overhead press even, you don't want to get hurt. So you need a little rewarming period. For all the women that listen to this, don't worry. By the time you figure out how to get your bathing suit off and your sports bra on, 10 minutes will have gone by because you're like wet and figuring it out at the gym. And then you go train. And I think in places like On It and places where I used to train, it's less weird to do that and more beneficial. But if you're an endurance athlete and you're doing like a lot of cardio, a lot of lean training, accessory work, you can plunge after. If you're strength training, and just to be on the safe side, quite often I won't do any ice plunging within a 5-hour window after a big workout, because I'm just at my age, I'm trying to get as much muscle built on me as I can, and I like to lift heavy.
Absolutely. And are you training the instructors at On It on your methods?
That's a really great question. The instructors at On It are very, very capable and knowledgeable. As you know, it's one of the top gyms in the country. And they just asked me to come in and do a coaches session to review how to utilize breath for performance training as well as cold exposure for performance, which I'm so happy to do. It's sort of like a one-off that I'm doing with the team there to be able to give them any insights I can, because I think that this is an important thing that someone like On It, that gym, right? They need to be best in class. And while I have a good understanding and have trained people in the gym around weights before, and I'm good at that, they excel in that. They're best in class. And so when I've been in the space, I've been like, oh, there's a sauna. I have my sauna master certification. I've used it for performance, the cold and all of that. I was like, hey guys, I love you. You guys are best in class. Let's do something to give some insight. And this builds to another part of the program. I work with a woman named Kim Lloyd at Sherpa Breath and Cold, and we beta tested university training over the last 2 years with a few universities, namely her alma mater and the place she was working before she came to do this with me, which was Denison University. And we worked in breathing protocols that were efficient and effective for coaches on dry land and just 5 minutes in their training, which if you know coaches at university level, they don't want to give you a lot of time to muck out with like, oh, that's breath work. So we built in performance training protocols for a year. And then the second year we built in ice. You got to go slow with university athletes and school athletic directors traditionally. We built in ice for recovery. We built in breath for performance, anxiety management, mimicking stress in the competition, and just had insane results, like just insane results, like over 60% improvement on all scores across the board for students who are swimming. And the women won the championships for the first time in 23 years. It's not to say that it's me and the breath and Kim or whatever. It's all of the coaches together working hand in hand in glove. And the reality is, if you want to put a W on the board at that level, at a university division level, or even at a professional level, and this is when I work with professional athletes, this is the game. Breath can be the thing that gets you over the edge. If you and your opponent are exactly alike in so many ways, it's not just how you feel that day and how recovered you are, which of course, and all your training, which is going to play into it. But if you want 1% is the W, right? If you want that win, like especially for swimmers, imagine that one less breath underwater is the difference on a time trial, so that like of time, so that someone's like winning a race and so on and so forth. So it's been epic to work with athletes in that way and then see numbers. Kim's actually just put together sort of like a study. It won't get published because it's a lot of variables, so it won't be like officially published, but it's really amazing data because we have year over year before from the student athletes, first year, second year now. So we can really compare all of those apples to apples. And she's presenting at some coaching conferences and stuff around the work we're getting to do. And it's epic. And it's a riff off of some of the work Patrick McEwen is doing. And the interesting thing is, you know, I always appreciate you because you always shine a light on the work that I'm doing. But the interesting thing is that there's not a lot of females in the space doing this. And so for female teams specifically, because like there's a correlation of like attracts like there, where they can listen to you because you like them. And also once we get past sort of the gatekeepers that feel like, who are these women coming in to talk to our male athletes? Male athletes are, I don't know if you have this experience, Tim, but male athletes are easy to work with. They're great. They listen, they adhere, they do their thing. I'm always like, everybody gets a gold star. And the guys are like, yeah, like, it's just, I don't
Yeah.
mean women are more challenging, but there's like more of a depth of conversation and they need to
Mhm.
know the why more. Just, I'm generalizing, but male athletes are just like, sometimes they're like, don't even tell me the why, just tell me I got a gold star and applaud me and like, let's go. And I'm just going to try the things. So
Yeah.
it's powerful. It's been so, so powerful. And I don't know if you have coaches or other, professional athlete training team listeners in your audience and things like that. But like we continue to we've been putting together packages now with universities where we come in multiple times over a season and we really work and curate that context for the
Mm.
sport. And there's beautiful things that we can do.
Well, that's awesome that you're doing that. I went to undergrad at Wake Forest University,
Yeah.
and went to Southern North Carolina. And Maya Angelou, was a professor there when I was an undergrad. Lots of famous people there, but the administrative team, I guess I would say, it was funny because they would say, "Oh, well, you can't give an athlete, I think at the time, a meal that has more than 25 or 30% protein content." But if you want to go eat McDonald's 3 times a day, that's perfectly fine. Like I mean, it's more political than it's not medically based.
Yeah, and it's also budget. It's also like the sign of the times. We see this in the medical community, right? It takes 20 years to catch up because rightly so in some ways, the medical community wants to make sure it's not just like one study, you know,
Right.
to back what they're about to change for eons of doctors, eons of time for doctors. So I get it. I'm in agreement with you that I think things move too slowly. And there are beautiful people out in the world working breath like this into sport. When I went to go work with a UFC athlete one-on-one, I went to her training and it's like 38 people in the training, predominantly males. And I thought I might as well walk in with like a lollipop and pigtails. I don't know a lot about UFC. Of course, I did my research and watched and kind of understood the sport context so I could apply tools. But going into to work with her on nutrition and breath and cold and seeing when I walked in the door, I was imposter syndrome. Let's be real. I was like, who am I to tell these people? And then I watched everyone in the room and was like, nobody knows how to breathe in here for their sport. One guy, I don't want to say no one. There's one guy, and you know what's interesting about that guy? Best grappler, best, has a great record, all the things. And it's like, you can really, really see it. And now there's people like Dave Wood is out of New Zealand working in the world. And my other mentor, Martin McPhillamy, who's, training people to do this more, going in and working with performance athletes. And also I work with people who are like, I want to run a triathlon. And I had one of my clients beat their triathlon, their marathon time in altitude versus what normally they're more at sea level by like 22 minutes. Like, are you kidding me? Just by understanding how you can do breath training. And so it's just wild. And I wonder if, I don't know, do you see this? It's like, people are like, I'm already breathing, Kristin.
Yeah.
Sports teams are like, we're already breathing. What's the big deal? This is so stupid. Like, not to downplay it, but, and I understand people don't know what they don't know, but it's sometimes I'm like, oh my God, that worked again. And it's just breath, just learning how to use the breath.
Yeah, I think it was like 9 or maybe 10 years ago. Admittedly, first time I heard someone say they were a breathwork coach. I'm like, why is that made up? Like, why would I need a coach to breathe? I mean, I understood, having a background in anatomy and physiology and all the, classes I had to take, it makes sense. But, I'm big into structural orthodontics, I guess you would say. So what got me into functional medicine was I was all set to go into an MD program and I had an unnecessary jaw surgery that they created more issues, didn't solve any of my issues. And, retrospectively, I know that it all could have been solved with an oral appliance. But, an oral appliance that costs a couple $1,000s versus $100,000 surgery. Of course, they're not going to tell you about that.
Yeah.
But now, I've been able to fix my sleep apnea by using a laser on the posterior tongue muscles. I
Mhm.
have a mandibular advancement appliance for my lower jaw. And then I'm going to have my tongue tie released because I have a little bit of a tongue tie. And that's the other thing. If you're listening and you say, oh, well, I talk fine, it has nothing to do with that. I mean, you have severe tongue tie can affect speech, but, the resting posture of the tongue, this, um, like babies, they will put the tongue on the roof of their mouth or they'll use a pacifier and that soothes the autonomic nervous system. The
Mhm.
resting position of the tongue should be on the roof of the mouth, not way down low. And if you don't, the surgery I had, they broke my upper and lower jaw, and they brought my lower jaw up and back, which reduces the amount of space or real estate the tongue has. So they created sleep apnea.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and
And
there
now,
are a lot of cases to be made for structural challenges creating those things. And I think that there are betterments that can be used with the breath as well. I do have, it's not always the people who are like trying to win the game that show up. It's like I have people who come deconditioned. I get recommendations from other doctors who show up with like asthma and apnea and it's like, great, how do we biomechanically, physiologically shift as much as we can? And then go to specialists who are doing, some kind of either dentistry or orthodontics or yeah, like Molly will talk about the tongue tie thing too, just sometimes with like sleep and like how there are obstructions that sometimes we need to clear, but rightly so, that should be the last line of defense, you know?
yeah, oh, I wasn't saying that should be, or what I'm doing is a replacement for breath work. I just meant like, my sleep apnea, I was able to fix it with a very simple intervention that was
Totally.
non-invasive. But they don't tell you that. And I was basically, they said, if you don't have the surgery, you won't have any of your own teeth left by the time you turn 30. So to a 20 or 21-year-old, you're freaking out. You're like, okay, can we do the surgery tomorrow?
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
like a couple of weeks later, I had the surgery done. But if the only tool you have is surgery, everyone needs surgery, right?
Totally, totally. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and it's frustrating, but it sounds also like what a beautiful opportunity for you to be able to teach people about that, right? I know it's like
Absolutely.
you went through a lot and to get to the end game, but then also you can talk to people about that when it comes to like understanding, yeah, the main cavity we use for like breath and sleep and recovery.
Absolutely. Talk to us. So you mentioned the female hormonal cycle. I remember learning in my doctorate program, for the ACL, for example, has estrogen receptors. So, during certain times of the cycle, female athletes are more prone to ACL tears.
Yeah.
Talk to us about how training should be modified, whether it's weight training, cold plunging, breath work for the female hormonal cycle.
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of case to be made around laxity, and that conversation spurred on quite a bit about like tearing muscle fiber and things like that, where women have, certain times of the month that there's more laxity in the joints, more often the back half of the cycle. I think what happens is there's kind of two things. I did an interview with Andy Galpin and then followed it up with this interview with Lauren Colenso Simple, and I'm probably butchering her last name. And really talked a lot about how the cycle affects weight training, and it's how estrogen affects different muscularity, cartilage, things like that. Now, there are shifts in the body. And even myself in some of my programming I was programming females a bit in the alignment with literature. That there's a lot of studies that are out there that talk about estrogenic effects on muscle development, and that it's anti-catabolic, and so you can train during I always said day like 5 or 6 to day 16 of your cycle. Those 10 days should be like your go hard days. Now, I don't totally dispel or disagree with that. Now, I think we have an energetics about us that is more introverted and open. This comes with like ovulation and all of that. I'll sometimes call ovulation like the high heels and red lipstick, moment of the month, where we're like up and out and extroverted and ready to go. And, whatever that is equates to any woman. It could be sneakers and sweats, whatever, but there's a time when we're like ready to kind of like go for it. And I don't mean sex, I mean like energetically we're ready to go for it. And so, and probably sex too, but we're getting into the gym, and those 10 days are the days that I typically will train with clients and say, don't put a rest day in there. Now that's really bio individual. If I have them doing like 2 big heavy days along that, they probably need a rest day. But it's the time when I put the least frequent rest days in. It's the time when I'm pushing the heaviest weights, is when my energetics match that. Now, I used to talk about that for that reason, but also for the fact that there is this anti-catabolic nature to estrogen rising in the body. And then on the back half of the cycle, we see a number of things. In the back 2 weeks, which we call the luteal phase, we see that there's more laxity. We see that there's more lethargy. We see that there's less emotional resilience, poorer sleep. If you talk to Patrick McEwen and read his story, his book called The Breathing Cure, he has a whole chapter on sort of why the hormones, and these are a lot based on TMJ studies, but there's enough studies there to warrant him saying this. It's like why our as our estrogen levels fall, we have a shift in our breathing and a shift in our connection to our pelvic floor, and our ability based on our hormones shifting in our reproductive years into the luteal phase, our ability to uptake oxygen can be reduced up to 25%. Okay, that's a big deal. Like if I'm running a race against another woman who's running a race at that time, and the theory of this research is true, that means that like even if we're in different parts of our cycle, even if I'm slightly better or more conditioned, there's a chance that that uptake of oxygen could shift me into lower gear and have it be, come in second to her, or, be a point of difference that I'd want to train for breathwork wise.
Right.
So all of these parts of our cycle are important, and the nuances and intricacies and the individuality. This is what I interviewed Lauren Colenso-Sempley about, is a foremost researcher on female hormones as applied to strength and conditioning. She is testing women in a lab, let's say 50 women, and nobody is aligned on their cycle. Someone's 28 days, someone's 22, someone's ovulating 3 days one month and 1 day another month. They're probably not 3 days, but like it's all over the map. And so in the places that I'm not testing my clients every day, unless they're using like Anido, which is a urine at home test you can do every morning that's made for fertility, but you can use it for whatever. Shout out to the perimenopausal, menopausal women. They can use it to get a grasp. If you're not on bioidentical hormones, you can use it to get a grasp of your hormones. But there's tools we can utilize. And also Lauren is seeing that we've put a lot of stake in the last 10 years in starting to say, women, train for your cycle. This is exactly what's happening. And even my meal plan program is giving women nutrition aligned with cycle, aligned with the gym, and energetically it works. And the reason that I kept it alive is because women are getting stronger, losing body fat if they want, and feeling great on it. But part of the reason that I instituted it was because of this muscle fiber thing with estrogens growing and spiking. And the reality is it's way less of import than we have even, than we've given it too much credit. And that's important to know, that there's a lot of energetics here, and that we are in the last 20 years built on the cycle that men sort of created, or last 120 years of men created in the workplace, right? Like you have a beautiful 24-hour hormonal cycle. I, on the other hand, do not. And so there's some function and to the form that we all fell in. This is just life. This is not a judgment on men creating. It's just, that's who was in the workplace first. So there's so much to that question, Tim, as you can tell. And there's so many exciting things about the superpower of being a woman with your hormones either balanced or all over the place. I want to say that as you get more understanding and ways that you can use them for you, that it really is like a tool in your tool belt. But it's quite, again, like harkening back to get a coach who nerds out about this stuff, right? I tell some of the women who work with me are like, I don't want to hear all this. Just tell me what to do. Here's where I'm in my cycle or whatever. Some of the women I work with are like, tell me everything. And that's cool. Yeah. But so much nuance to it. And I think there's a beautiful opportunity to be doing a little more fasting and a little bit more cold exposure, even when you have your period and your hormones are in a low phase. Like Stacey Sims would say, that's the low hormone phase, day 1 through day 5, if day 1 is your first bleed. And then there's a picking up period of our energy and energetics. There's a good 7 to 10 days there to play in the gym hardcore. And then don't throw out strength training, but maybe bring it down to twice a week for those back half of the months. And you do more accessory work and you put in some interesting, safe cardio. And, I like sprint work. I don't know why we don't talk about it more, but it is game changing because it forces an adaptation to your cells.
Absolutely. And in terms of males versus females, have you seen more benefits with males versus females in terms of cold exposure and fat loss?
You guys always just everything, the needle moves without you thinking about it. That's not totally true for every man. I think that I know for sure that there's some studies that showcase women have a greater tolerance in the daytime for a little bit longer exposure and shiver response. and less in the evening. There are studies, and we can kind of see, and just now at this point, I keep saying 3,000 people. It's definitely more than that at this point, but one-on-one, I put 3,000 people or more in the cold. And I'd say it's 70% females I put in the cold. And because of that, I really get to see state shifts happen over the long term. And it's just men tolerate daily plunges that are slightly shorter, better. That's what it seems like to me. Again, this is heavily anecdotal. Doesn't mean that men aren't out there being like, oh, I can do 10 minutes. Women too, but there is something about stress tolerance that feels like women can kind of grok it a little bit more naturally, let's say, can get in the cold and navigate it. Perhaps it's the childbirth thing. Perhaps it's, taking in all surroundings, understanding how to downregulate in the midst of stress. I don't fully know. But women seem to tolerate it a bit better, a little longer, a little colder, but not as frequently, meaning like not every day of the week. You're doing ice plunges 3 days a week, you're fine. The other notion of like, I did 37 degrees and, for 40 minutes, it's like, look, there's a point of diminishing returns. We saw this with Joe Rogan, right? He got in his Morosco Forge the first time. He got in for a minute and got out. And you and I both know what happened after he got out after a minute, right? Jocko and Goggins and all his crew called him and were like, oh, big MMA, MC, big tough guy. You lasted a minute. You suck. And so what does he do 2 days later? He gets in for 21 and a half minutes. And he even speaks about the 21 and he does it on Instagram Live. So no one can know that he's cheating. And what does he do? He talks about now he says that was pretty intense. That was like too long. That I think he understands that's point of diminishing returns. Now, if Joe Rogan called me and said, ice bath competition, you versus me, who can stay in the longest, I'm showing up for that. Okay. I'm showing up with that BDE and maybe I'll win, maybe I'll lose. But the reality is that's too long. That's just too long for the average person who's not highly adapted. And once we're checking in on managing stress, right? This is like why I love Wim Hof. I wouldn't be here or popularized in the way that I am if it wasn't for him doing this for 25 years and raising awareness. And I want to train for life. So I downregulate myself, and newbies and beginners, of course, there's intermediate advanced protocols, but I downregulate myself next to the ice bath or the cold body of water and get in, because we don't have the time when the phone call's coming or we have to save the baby from the truck to be like, hold on, 30 rounds, super ventilated. Let me jack up my nervous system so I know where I'm going. Now, Wim's method, if you're going to do some rounds of breath like that and pump your nervous system seated before you like decide to get in the cold, then okay, you're matching sympathetic to sympathetic, which is about to be the charge you're getting and that gas reflex in the cold water. But if we could downregulate ourselves, calm our system, let ourselves know it's okay, be in a state of ease, then apply that dose of cold stress and go, okay, we got to navigate back down. That mimics more of what is happening in life. And then we're training for the game of life. And that's why I'm a big believer in at least starting with that. Doesn't mean, listen, I'll be like face down, lying next to the tub, doing Wim, different breath work that he's guided online. I'll do all the things. And I love all the adventure. It's just, let's train for life first so that we can navigate stress and stop being so hard on ourselves and each other before we're doing like 42 head dunks in 10 minutes and whatever. Because once you pass that point of the turnover and you're like, okay, I navigated and brought myself back down through stress and I'm okay, you really got to decide, like, then what game are you playing? Is it ego? How long? Are you playing with your edges? Because I typically do like a 6-minute plunge, but because I want to have the shiver response of my body adapting. And at 3 minutes doesn't necessarily happen. So there's that push and pull, right? And I love that you talk to Tom. And I think Tom does great research and he's a wonderful analytical mind. And I love his N of 1 on testosterone. And I think that there is some fodder out there. I'm just not quite sure that the like, get in a cold tub, it spikes your testosterone. Like, I'm just not sure it's widespread enough right now. Yeah. I'm saying cool, could be. If someone wants to move their testosterone needle, I'd much rather have them get on something that's like the Vasper. I don't know if you've ever been on that.
I've never been on it, but I know what it is.
Yeah, like the Vasper is game changing for hormones. And it's like there's enough research of people doing specifically the Vasper and then seeing their T-score go up if they're males. And so like, cool. And even women's hormones will align with it quite often. And that's a chilled, cooling, recumbent stepper bike that you sprint on. So it's like all the things combined in one, and also hard to find in your local market. So Vasper, put more in the US so we can get on them.
There you go. And along those lines, you've been doing this for a minute. What's something you know today to be true that you wish you would have known in the beginning or even 5 or 6 years ago?
More isn't better. I think there's also an element of like, I've had a lot of alpha energy for a really long time in biohacking, doing all the things. People are always like, you have so much going on right now. And I'm like, that's 40 years. It's been going on. And there's something about saying no, that there's a power in that. There's something about stillness. I just came off this 6 months of being in a van on my own, driving around the country. I mean, I saw people, but there were very lonely times. And in that, and they're beautiful times where I threw myself in cold rivers and just everything, right? And amazing people. But a lot of windshield time to really have to get to know myself and to know that I like to be seen, just as a human. I don't mean as a professional. I just mean like to be seen, like someone to say, oh, are you having a tough day? Or, oh, the tire blew out. Or, there were lots of new things, lots of neuroplasticity. I grew in that 6 month period of time, and lots of getting to know ourselves. And I think if we don't take time to meditate, do breath work, reflect, sit with ourselves, sit with our ugly parts even. And I wish someone had told me that longer, right? It can be an ugly part. It doesn't have to be wrong or bad or shameful. Just like sit with something and say, oh, this doesn't feel great. Let me kind of wash that over me and see what that's about. Or maybe let me see if I can pass through it. But if we don't sit with it, we brush it off and it shows up in other areas. And I wish someone.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, they can't be in the room or in their living room without the TV on or on their phone. Like they just can't be with themselves. And I mean, I'm still a work in progress, but I've gotten significantly better. I used to be one of those people. But now I'm like, oh, I mean, I don't watch the news anymore. I mean, once, maybe every 3 months or something, I will. But I just, Paul Check has a rule. If you can walk 10 feet with someone without someone telling you something, you didn't need to know it.
Yeah. Yeah, he's so
I think
lovely.
that's true. Well, thank you so much for the work that you're doing. We're going to put up your links, and we'll just go ahead and tell the listeners and viewers what your link and main website is.
Yeah, you can find me on wellpower.life and sherpabreathandcold.com, and Instagram, which is where all the hotness and ridiculousness is of cold plunging and breath, at biohacking.breath.cold. Yeah, and I'm around for it. I answer my own DMs. I'm that girl. I still answer my DMs. So write me anything. And I really try to help people out. And a lot of free resources out there on my websites for guided breath work to calm your state, and guided cold plunges that you can download if you're feeling like, hey, I want someone with me, but I just can't quite like afford it, or I'm too nervous. Then like play one of my tracks, and we'll spend a little time energetically together.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And hopefully we can have you back on in the future.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here on the Boss Body podcast with you.
Awesome. Take care and thank you so much.